Okay, so this is the epilogue, this is the final part, the final installment, the final piece of the puzzle that is the Silent Movie Marathon 2. It is December 2015, 3 months after I did the Silent Marathon to begin with. And before I even get onto my kind of epilogic thoughts, I just invented a word, epilogic. Before I get onto my retrospective thoughts on the marathon, I filmed the marathon, did the marathon in the beginning of September. It was awesome, I loved it, but I looked at the footage afterwards and I was like, what have you done? As you'll probably know if you're watching this now, it's been a long one. It's been a very long one, whether you've watched this in parts or in the full whack. It's been a long one. If you call the 24-hour movie marathons I do kind of my mainstream films, this has kind of been like my Shia LaBeouf art project. It's kind of, people are just kind of probably looking at it thinking, it's a bit weird that, isn't it? Why has he done that, you know? Anyway, it was fun to do. I've discovered so many great films that I'll probably watch again and again throughout my life, and for that it was awesome. And I hope you enjoyed it. But in September I did the marathon in the first couple of weeks of September, then I went back home to Wales for a week to see David Gilmour live, which was like a once-in-a-lifetime amazing experience. And I also, in London that weekend, went to see Steamboat Bill Jr., one of Buster Keaton's films from 1928, in a cinema. It was the first time I'd ever seen a silent film in the cinema before, and it was actually not even a week after I'd finished doing the silent movie marathon, so I kind of felt like that was part of my silent movie marathon, weeks long, adventure. And also they screened The Playhouse, one of his shorts before that as well. And just to go into that very briefly, I went to see it with James Merchant, fellow YouTuber. He got us free tickets, which was awesome, but it was great to see a silent film in a cinema. There was like this red curtain, there was like liner notes on the film for people to pick up and look and read. It was at the BFI in London, and just like the red curtain and stuff, and kind of like the playing of silent movie music kind of feeling before the movie came on. It was just so good, and then the film itself was fantastic, and people were laughing and enjoying it. And the best part of it for me, apart from seeing it on the big screen, and it wasn't a huge screen, but it was still quite a sizable theatre room. You had a lot of old people in the front, like even like between the gap of the short film The Playhouse and Steamboat Bill Jr., this old woman was in the front, and she said, or near the front, and she said, "Oh, they don't make them like they used to." I was kind of like thinking, you probably weren't even born when this came out, but it's just such a stereotypical comment that I thought was funny. But the best part was when I was leaving, there was I could see who was sitting behind us, and there was this young girl. She must have been like no older than 30, probably it looked like mid to late 20s, and she got up and she said to the person she was with, "That was amazing." And I was like, yes, that was a yes. Like, oh, it was just such a great experience to see that. I had to then rush and kind of like power walk from South Bank to London Victoria to catch my coach with James Merchant, so that was a bit of a stress, but it was a great experience. And also, on my flight back home on that trip, I watched Charlie Chaplin's Limelight, a film he made in the 50s, and I'm not going to get into that because I just loved it so much. It's probably one of my new favourite films of all time. I was inspired by the Gold Rush to watch more Chaplin, and then when I was home I delved into City Lights, I watched Modern Times, and so I still had that kind of, the silent movie marathon kick was still going, and then it kind of fizzled out a bit and I haven't watched any recently. But yeah, and also I was watching so many films I actually lost count by the end of it, because I think at the end I said I watched 41 films when it was 42. So yeah, awesome, I loved it. But what I want to do was round up my 10 favourite films in order that I watched in Silent Movie Marathon 2, and also talk about one extra thing that I watched since the Silent Movie Marathon 2. I said throughout the video I was going to do like some kind of epilogue, like looking back and maybe like watching some of the documentaries I didn't have time to get to during the marathon. I didn't really do that except for one documentary that I really wanted to see, and that was on this Trip to the Moon Blu-ray. And it even says it on the front because it's kind of, it's like 10 times longer than the film itself, but it is called The Extraordinary Voyage by Sergei Bromberg and Eric Lang. It is I believe, I'm not sure if it was made by French people, but either way, the restoration of A Trip to the Moon was done in France and all that kind of thing. And it's an hour-long documentary about not only the restoration of A Trip to the Moon, but about the film itself, and also about Georges Méliès. So it's about an hour long. You get kind of three distinct segments. You get kind of the early history of cinema and how Georges Méliès factored into that. Then you take his idea and conception and production and release of A Trip to the Moon, and then kind of his downfall in the movie industry. And then the third part is all about the restoration of the colour version of A Trip to the Moon, which had been thought to be lost and destroyed. And this guy found, we didn't find it, he traded with this French collector traded with a Spanish film collector. They did a swap, because the Spanish guy said he had a colour version of A Trip to the Moon, and the French guy was like, wow, that's like the Holy Grail. So he swapped it. He knew it was in bad shape, and it was just like a block. It was just a big block. You couldn't move it. It was just all stuck together and stuff. And so he spent like a year, right, like putting the film reel into like this jar with like heated water, I think, and would leave it there for weeks so he could like carefully peel away the strips and try and preserve them. And then he would line up every single frame, and there's like tens of thousands, or I think over 10,000 in A Trip to the Moon. And he took a digital camera image of every single frame. Unfortunately, this was in the early 2000s, so it wasn't super high quality images, so that you couldn't really use that later on for the Blu-ray or anything like that. But he spent like a year trying to at least preserve what was there, and some of it was brittle and it cracked and stuff, and it wasn't complete in that sense because some of the frames were just broken. But many years later, when the technology caught up, in recent times, this American guy stepped in. He put the money into it. He funded the restoration, and I loved seeing the process of them restoring it, where they would take the black and white version they had and put that in with the color version, and they would digitally colorize it, but do it in a way that was kind of faithful to the original coloring, because of course the coloring of this film back in 1902 was done in like a factory with hundreds of women. They would sit down with little tiny paintbrushes and literally just on every single frame. I don't know about the frame rate actually, because film traditionally is 24 frames per second, so you'd have to paint 24 little images for just 1 second. That's why they had hundreds of people working, doing it in factories and things. But I'm not sure if I think the frame rate was lower than 24 back then, because it's it looks quite fast. So I'm assuming frame rates were quite different back then. I know they are actually, but I'm not sure about Trip to the Moon because it's 1902. It's a bit earlier than the films I know about in the 20s. But yeah, a lot of frames need to be painted and all that kind of stuff, painstakingly done, and so it always looks kind of messy. But I kind of like the kind of messy. It's kind of like you just know that every frame has been painted by hand, and there's such a charm to that. And they really tried to have that sort of same kind of scrappy feeling and not be too clinical and clean, which I really appreciated. And it also just shows you like how like film reels can be destroyed and decomposed, and it was like heartbreaking to see. It was a really fascinating documentary, and you get people in there talking about Georges Méliès, and I really enjoyed that part of it, and hearing about his life and stuff, and how the story that's told in the film Hugo by Martin Scorsese is actually quite accurate. I wasn't really sure, to be honest, but he really had a downfall after his career as a movie director, and he kind of burnt most of his films as a kind of a career suicide, and worked in a little toy shop in a train station. I mean, the movie is a lot more accurate, Hugo, than I thought, Georges Méliès' life was. I can't wait to revisit that film now, because I loved it enough already. But anyway, really want to talk about that. The Extraordinary Voyage, fantastic documentary, really rounds off this Blu-ray set. The only thing that I think this set is missing is maybe you could have thrown like 10, 20, 30 of his shorts onto there, not just 2, because there's so many of them and they're so short. Even though like hundreds were destroyed, there's hundreds that have survived. Anyway, it might be licensing issues. Just wanted to mention that. Fantastic Blu-ray. Now, to round this whole thing off, my top 10 films that I saw in this this Silent Movie Marathon 2. So number 10, Birth of a Nation. Yep, controversial, a horrific masterpiece. It's generally one of the best films I've ever seen from that part of cinema history. Just how early it was, and how ahead of its time it was, and how enjoyable it was in terms of the first part of the film. And then the second part of the film I think is just important from, again, I've said it before, a historical perspective, and to people to look at it and say, this is how you don't be a human, basically. But I have to give it credit for its place in history and how just impressive it was from a technical standpoint. Number 9, The Gold Rush. Despite a problem I had with the female character in the film, I just loved everything about this. Just the way it looked, the way it felt, the emotion that Chaplin put into the film, the comedy, just fantastic. Something about this film I just really loved so much. Number 8, we have The Thief. Is it The Thief? Yeah, The Thief of Baghdad, starring Douglas Fairbanks. I've gone over this before, I don't really need to recap, but I just love the fun and adventure of this film and the scope of it, and just the little messages as well, but just the overall production and how lavish it was. I mean, just awesome, awesome stuff. Number, what are we at? 9, 10, 9, 8. Number 7, The Great White Silence, one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. Very moving experience. I just, again, loved it so much. Fantastic film. You really need to see it if you haven't. Just, it's something so eerie about it, and so exciting at the same time. And just seeing how mankind has gone out and discovered, you know. And that's this is very emblematic of that kind of man-conquering nature, I feel. I need to keep track of the numbers. This will be number 6. Spies, Fritz Lang Spies. I can't wait to watch this again. This was so good. The direction is amazing. The characters are fun. I mean, it's just such a blast. It's you know, I mean, Fritz Lang could just do anything, couldn't he? Just the psychological thriller, you know, big science fiction, you know, space movie, a futuristic sci-fi dystopian movie, a sprawling crime epic, a massive fantasy adventure, and you know, an espionage thriller. I mean, Fritz Lang in the 20s is just about probably the best period of any filmmaker you'll ever see in the history of cinema, and this is no different. I think this deserves to be up there, in my opinion, with Metropolis and with all those other films that he made that was so great. Number 5 and number 4, I don't know where to put these two. I really have to watch them again to decide, but I have to go with Seventh Heaven and Lucky Star. Love these two films by Frank Bazegi with what's her name? Oh my god, I've forgotten her name. She's one of my favourite actors of all time now, and I've forgotten her name. I'm not going to look. Janet Gaynor and Charles Farrell. The pairing of those two actors in both of these films is fantastic in very different ways in both of them. And Seventh Heaven is just, I need to watch it again, I feel, but I just loved it. You know, even if the ending didn't emotionally hook me like the way I wanted it to, I still loved the film start to finish. And Lucky Star was maybe even better. And I loved how different they both were. Both their characters in both films are so different, and just showed what great actors they were, and they still had great chemistry with different roles and with different relationships. Moving on to the top 3 now. Wings, amazing. You know, the aerial fight scenes are fantastic and all that. It's very impressive from a technical point of view, but the characters really drew me in. I loved how it was pretty much a love story between two men, and in a very platonic way, and a very moving ending. It shows you the horrors of war, and also just all the little bits and pieces that went along with this film. The fun of them getting drunk and that kind of thing, and letting off steam after the war, but then how the war never really ends, you know, until it does end. But I mean, it's just you really get the feel of the price people had to pay back then, while also delivering a really entertaining movie. And that is that's probably one of the best things you can do with the film, I think, is have a great message but have an overall really entertaining film. Number 2, nah, do you know what? I'm gonna go back on this. This isn't number 2. This is number 3. I'm gonna bump Wings up to number 2. Wings is number 2. This is number 3, but it is a better film than Wings. Battleship Potemkin. What a fantastic film. So just powerful, and yeah, full of propaganda, but it's sorry, my right eye is really itchy for some reason. Yeah, just such one of the most well-crafted films I think I've ever seen, and just the whole ending, I just got my blood pumping, like what is going to happen. There's the soundtrack. I'm like, I got so engrossed in this film. Maybe it should be number 2, but I enjoy Wings more as a film, but this one is just, I can't wait to watch this one again as well. Battleship Potemkin is required viewing, in my opinion. So number 1, I'm quite kind of surprised I'm putting this in number 1, but I think it's the element of surprise, how much it blew me away. I was intrigued by it. I wasn't like really excited to check it out, but when I watched it, it was just like, it was revelatory. It really was. It's the adventures of Prince Ahmed, by Lotte Reiniger, who's just a pioneer. This woman who pretty much almost invented animation in a way. I mean, this is the first ever surviving feature-length animated film, as I've talked about. I don't know why I'm going into it again. I guess it's been 3 months and I've kind of forgotten some of the stuff I've said, but you know the story, and I was just taken away by it. So taken away by it that it's one of my favourite films, I think, of all time. absolutely brilliant. Just such a great adventure, and so unique and different and innovative, and such a weird way to tell a story back then with bits of cardboard, and it just works so well. And I just have to give credit to how she was able to pull that off with what seems to be a very rudimentary, basic, primitive form of storytelling, and yet it really hit me in a, you know, quite a impactful way. So that's my favorite, I think, of all of them. But really, these 10 are like I just love all of them so much. And then the other ones were really great too. I mean, these are the ones that I give 10 out of 10. And there's probably another one I give 10 out of 10 as well, but I've forgotten what it was. But there's other ones I loved, you know, Taboo, and yeah, I love the whole thing. I love the whole thing. A few that weren't so great, but for the most part, it was just an amazing, fantastic experience. So I hope you enjoyed it. It's been a long ride, and we're finally at the end. And yeah, what's next? Silent Movie Marathon 3? I don't know. You tell me. I'll do it, I think, at least for myself, but I don't know whether I'll be filming it because, well, maybe if I do film it, I'll be more wise with the films I choose, because I definitely bit off more than I can chew here. Don't know whether it worked or not. You can tell me about that, but that has been my journey into the silent era of movie history, and there's still so many more for me to watch. So I'm really excited to see. I've already started piecing together lots of different Blu-rays that I can get for next year to do that marathon. But I think next time I might be a bit more lenient and watch films that aren't available in HD yet, and kind of broaden my horizons a little bit more in terms of that as well, because that'll take me out of more of the mainstream stuff. We'll see what happens. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking around if you have, and that's about it. My Facebook Messenger is belling me, you know. That's something you never hear in a silent film, is someone's Facebook Messenger going off on their phone. So that's an appropriate way to end. I think we're done here. Thanks.